hope everybody's staying safe. I hope everybody's being smart. And I hope everybody is staying on code. Now, despite my situation, despite my car still not being fixed, and I'm still not back at work, and things are not looking very positive right now, despite all of that, I have decided that instead of just sitting around feeling sorry for myself, that I was going to be productive, and I was going to get out some good content for you guys, and we were going to have some good discussions, and we were going to dig in our heels as far as our reparations are concerned, because that's our issue. That's our main issue. That's the issue for foundational Black Americans. It should be the issue for all Americans, but definitely for foundational Black Americans whose ancestors come from, as Professor Black Truth so eloquently says, comes from the killing fields of the American South during antebellum slavery. We should all, if we can't agree on nothing else, if we can't come together on nothing else, we ought to be able to agree on and come together that reparations are owed. It is a blood debt. Not just for slavery, but for all the things that have happened to foundational Americans on this North American continent since slavery. Right? So, and that's what I want to go over today. That's what I want to talk about today. Today, I want to talk about how the mere existence of white supremacy demands reparations for foundational Black Americans. Just the mere existence of it. And all the things that it has produced for us and against us and around us for the last 400 plus years. So that's what I want to get into today. So please like this video. Please share it. Please share it with on your social media. Like I said, please have these conversations on and off social media, but please share it. For those of you who are not subscribed, please hit that subscribe button so you can subscribe to the channel. Hit that bell notification so you can be notified when we upload videos. Like I said, although I kind of think my channel already is shadow banned because of my content, because my content has just been undiluted from the very beginning. But anyway, the link to my email, if you want to, if there's anything that you want to discuss, if there's anything that you want me to talk about, the email to the channel is will be in the description box, as well as the PayPal link and my Cash App. All of that is in the description, but all of that will be in the description box. So let's get this thing moving, because I don't want to be here too long. So let's go ahead on and get started. Now, the first thing that I want to do is I want to hit the root of the problem. You know, a lot of folks like to deal with the symptoms of an issue instead of going to the heart of the matter, instead of hitting the root of the disease. So first thing I want to do is I want to get to the root of the disease. And I want to go back to the basics, the essentials and the basics. The word white supremacy, well, it's not one word, it's two words, white supremacy. But that phrase is being thrown around so much that I think it's losing its power. I think it's losing its definition, it's losing its meaning. White folks have picked up on it. White folks in the dominant society, especially white supremacists, and those who are white supremacist apologists, and those who hold to the tenet of white supremacy, they've gotten a hold to it, and they're doing everything that they can to try to dilute it. You understand what I'm saying? To try to change its meaning, or to just flat out act like it doesn't exist. So I think what we need to do, first of all, is get back to what white supremacy really is at its core. That's the first thing we need to do, so that you can understand how the mere existence of white supremacy dictates that we must receive our reparations. We must receive our tangibles from this government, right? So This definition is coming out of dictionary.com, and it is the definition of white supremacy, and it is a noun, and it is the belief, theory, or doctrine that white people are inherently superior to people from all other racial and ethnic groups, especially black people, and are therefore rightfully the dominant group in any society. So that is at the root, at the core, what white supremacy is. This belief, this ideology, this thought, this doctrine, this theory that white folks, that Anglo-Saxon folks, especially Anglo-Saxon males, are inherently superior to everybody else, especially black folks. And therefore, because they are inherently superior, they have the right to dominate everybody else. They have the right to control and dominate, to oppress, to subjugate everybody else, especially black people. That is white supremacy in a nutshell right there. It's not a person, it's not a place, it's a belief, it's an ideology, it's a mindset, is what white supremacy is. And this notion came around, I'd say about the 1700s is when this notion of white superiority, white supremacy or white superiority came on the scene. Through this, I think it was a German doctor. He was a European, and he was the one that came up with the name Caucasian. He was the one that started really pushing the difference in the races and all of this, and he was the one that started pushing this theory that white people are better than black folks, right? And over time, they even started trying to use science, pseudoscience, to come in and show where white people were inherently superior to black people. Like I said, all other non-white people, but especially black people. And then in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, then they started trying to do all of these different tests, and they came out with that book, The Bell Curve, and all of this kind of stuff. And the doctor that the man that Dr. Francis Cress Wilson debated, I can't remember his name, but I'll find it and I'll put it down in the description box. She debated him because he got to talking about how black folks were inherently inferior to white people, and that we didn't learn on their level, and they were so much smarter than us, and all of this. But this whole thing really started taking root in Europe around the 1700s, right? And it has grown, and it has grown, and it has grown. It has been the reason for all the colonization in Africa and in other places. It has been the reason why, white folks have gone into India, and they have gone into Hawaii, and they have gone into Latin America, and they have gone into South America, and all of these different places, and they go in, and because they inherently feel like they're superior, they go in and they expect the natives in those places to just bow down to them, to just willingly subjugate themselves to them, and when they don't, they result to violence. Because they have convinced themselves that they just have this God-given, natural-born right to dominate everybody else, to terrorize people, to take what belongs to people, to steal from people, rob, kill people, burn down people's homes, and disrupt whole civilizations. They went and they killed off all the Tasmanians, all the native Tasmanians. They killed off all of them. And this is the theory behind that behavior. And as Dr. Francis Cress Wilson also taught us in the ISIS papers, because they know that they are genetically weak, And because they honestly know that they are genetically inferior, that's the reason why they fear and hate the black man so much. Is because they know that the black man, with his seed, has the ability to annihilate, to totally destroy their genetics. So for centuries, they have waged war on the black man and the black woman and the black child through the black man. Okay? So, like I said, that we just needed to define it and get back to the root of what white supremacy is. White supremacy is not a person. It's not a group of people. It's a thought. It's a belief. It's a theory. So that's the reason why anybody can be a white supremacist. Anybody can hold to the tenets of white supremacy. Anybody, no matter what your color is, no matter what your ethnic group is, no matter what your race is, no matter what homeland you come from or where you're native to or whatever, anybody can hold to the tenets of white supremacy. Anybody can feel like white people are inherently superior to everybody else. So can you be black and be a white supremacist? Yes, you can. Can you be Asian and be a white supremacist? Yes, you can. Can you be Latino or Hispanic and be a white supremacist? Yes, you can. Because white supremacy is not a person. It's a belief. It's an ideology. It's a doctrine that white people are inherently superior. So when white folks come to you, and when folks from the dominant society come to you, and folks from other groups come to you and tell you, oh, well, I'm black, how can I be a white supremacist? Or I'm Asian, how can I be a white supremacist? Or I'm Hispanic, how can I be a white supremacist? Or I'm from Africa, how can I be a white supremacist? I'm from the islands, how can I be a white supremacist? Or whatever the case may be. You understand what I'm saying? If their behavior, if the way they conduct themselves, publicly and privately, shows that they too believe that white folks are more superior than everybody else, then that makes them a white supremacist. Because they have that belief as well as the white supremacists have that belief. That's the reason why we call people coons and bootlicks and all of that. Why? It's because they honestly believe that. You know, there are black people who actually believe that white folks' ice is colder than black folks' ice. That everything white is right and everything white is better. And because they have that mindset, because they have that belief, that makes them a white supremacist. Just a white supremacist in blackface. That's it. Brother Grizzly Islam said they black people with white minds. So don't let people from other cultures and other races and other ethnic groups tell you that they can't be white supremacists because they're not white. Oh, yes, you can. Now, let's move on. And let's talk about how white supremacy, you understand what I'm saying? This belief, this theory, this ideology that white people are inherently superior, especially to black people. Let's talk about how it played a role in the very founding, in the very foundation of this nation. Because we know that slavery, the enslavement of black people, whether they were native to this land, you understand what I'm saying? Whether they were indigenous to this land in North America, because we know that we were already here. Black folks were native all over the world, all over the planet. We were the natives everywhere. So if we were the natives all over Europe and all over Africa and all over Asia, if we were the in Australia and all of those, Tasmania, if we were the natives in all of them other places, then why all of a sudden did it just cut off at North America or South America? No, we were native to the planet. So that means we were native to the North American continent. So all the people that were enslaved on this soil, the North American continent at that time, all the people that were enslaved were not just Africans that were brought in through the transatlantic slave trade. We already know that only about 6% of the enslaved Africans actually made it to the North American continent, and that would have been like maybe between 3 to 600,000 enslaved Africans. So where did they get all them slaves from? The natives. That's what they did. That's how they did it. They would go in and they would enslave the natives. The ones that they didn't kill, they would enslave, they would rape. They enslaved the natives. So if they did it everywhere else, why would they all of a sudden change up and it was working? Why would they all of a sudden change it up when they got to North America? No. But you have to understand that white supremacy existed here on the North American continent before the United States did. It was white supremacy that brought about the enslavement on the North American continent, just like everywhere else, the continent of Europe, the continent of Africa, the continent of Asia, and everywhere else. It was white supremacy that brought on this enslavement, this forced labor, that built the economy so that the United States could finally decide, well, the colonies at that time could finally decide that they wanted their independence, because, you know, we making all the money, you understand, because all the money that was being made on the North American continent was being sent to Britain, because we were still British subjects. So the folks that were here, the colonizers, you understand what I'm saying? It's colonies, so they were colonizers. The colonizers that were here were like, okay, wait a minute, hold up. We making all this money. You understand what I'm saying? They taxing us. We got to send all of our money to them and all of that. And we the ones over here with our slaves making the money. We need to fight for our independence so we can keep our money to ourselves. So we can keep our riches and our wealth to ourselves. That's all the Revolutionary War was about. It was about money. The colonialists that were here were tired of sending all their money that they were making off of this free slave labor. They were tired of sending all of that to Great Britain and not having the representation that they thought that they should have or whatever. So that's the reason why they decided that they were going to fight for their independence so that they could keep their money. Just like the Civil War and every other war that has been waged by the United States or that the United States has been a part of, all of those wars have been about money. That's what war is about. War is about money. Bottom line, war is about the pocket and filling the pocket of certain people. So you have to understand, racism was the game of the day. White supremacy was the game of the day even before this became a nation. It was globally. So what would make it any different here? when they were doing the same thing here that they had done all over the globe. Go in and colonize. Go in and through force and through violence take over. Once if coercion didn't work, if persuasion didn't work, if deception didn't work, then they would resort to violence. But one way or the other, they were going to take over. They were going to enslave the people. They were going to force the people to work for them. They were going to take over the natural resources. And they were going to claim it for themselves. They were going to steal it. Okay? Now, so in order for this country to be founded on white supremacy already had to be here, up and running and functioning before this landmass became a quote-unquote nation, the United States of America. Okay? So we've already proven that. You understand what I'm saying? We've already proven that slavery in North America goes back to 1526. When the Spanish dude came over here, right around that South Carolina, Georgia border, came here with those 100 enslaved Africans. And those Africans met up with the natives that were already here. They came, they kidnapped some natives that were already here, took them back to Spain with them. But the 100 enslaved Africans that they brought here rose up, did a rebellion, and escaped off into the woods somewhere. Because they hooked up with the natives. Why do you think that when Christopher Columbus came over and so many of the other Europeans came over, they always brought black people with them? They brought black Moors with them because they could read the maps and all of that, but also because they knew that the natives would be black and that those Moors would look like the natives and that the natives would be more likely to interact with these other black folks. These folks that look like them. Okay? So we have to establish that white supremacy was already here, up and operating, and already running the show. Right? Okay. So officially in 1619, we get the very beginning of slavery. Right? And at that time, it's run by the colonists, the colonials that are here, but it's basically spearheaded by Great Britain, right? Well, then we get to the 1700s, 1776, where, like I said, the colonists here decide, okay, we want our independence because we want to be able to keep our own money. We want to have our own government. We don't want to have to answer to nobody else. We don't want to have to give our money to nobody else, right? Okay, so then they fought the Revolutionary War. 1776 comes along. They declared their independence. The whole time they've got these black enslaved folks that they're forcing to work. They raping them, they killing them. You understand what I'm saying? It's forced labor. Now all the money they can keep it for themselves because they have won their independence. Okay? So now they gotta have a constitution. They've gotta have a document that governs how the government works. And this government is a white supremacist government. Why? Because it consists of nothing but white supremacists. It consists of nothing but a bunch of Anglo-Saxon white men who inherently think that they're better than black folks. They inherently think that they're better than the people that they have enslaved. Of course they do, because if they didn't, they wouldn't have enslaved those people. Okay? So now, let's get into the part that the Constitution plays in undergirding and upholding slavery. Because the Constitution is most definitely the final say. It is supposed to be the law of the land. Right? And we know that slavery for 200 plus years, 250 plus years was legal. The laws supported it. And these laws were supposed to be based on the Constitution. So we've got to see what the Constitution says about slavery, if it says anything at all. Okay? Now, I'm going to break this down real simple. Because like I said, I'm not trying to be here all day. But I'm going to break this down real simple. I found this on studylib.net. And for the purposes of this video, I'm going to do the whole thing in a nutshell. It says the U.S. Constitution and slavery. Every word decides a question between power and liberty. That's a quote from James Madison, January 19th, 1792. And I'll have this picture in the video, but I'll also have this a little section linked in the description box. Excuse me. And it shows James Madison, Gouverneur Morris, Pierce Butler, and George Mason. And those were men that were all a part of the framing of the Constitution and different articles and all this kind of stuff, and the whole bringing together of the government and all of that. Because, you know, the government of the United States used to be in Philadelphia. It started in Philadelphia. It eventually moved to Washington, D.C., but it started in Philadelphia. Philadelphia used to be the seat of the federal government in the United States. Okay? That's where all the that's where the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, all of that was written and signed and all of that in Philadelphia. Now it says, Section 1, Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution. Representation and direct taxes shall be apportioned among several states which may be included within this union, according to their respective numbers. So they're talking about the number of representatives that would go to the government to represent their different state based on the population numbers. Because that's still how we do it. Based on the population numbers of each state, that determines how many representatives you'll have in Congress. Right? Which shall be determined by adding to the whole number of free persons, including those bound to the service for a term of years, and excluding Indians not taxed, 3/5 of all other persons. Now, when they talk about all other persons, they're talking about slaves. They don't specifically say the word slaves when they're talking about all other persons, because you heard them just say what they said about free persons. Then you heard I'm talking about indentured servants, including those bound to service for a term of years. So if you're bound to service for a term of years, then that means that you are indentured servant. You have to serve this many years until your debt is paid, right? Excluding Indians, so that takes Indians out of it. So who is this 3/5 of all other persons? Those are slaves. Those were the enslaved people, right? So many people have broken this down, saying that it was 3/5 of all other people, meaning 3/5 of the slave population. You understand? So 3/5 of all other persons means 3/5 of all other people, 3/5 of that other population, those other persons. So 3/5 means that you have to count all those other persons. You understand what I'm saying? And you have to divide it by 3/5. So what it has become, what it has become to been known to become is the 3/5 compromise, right? And the way they break the 3/5 compromise down is every 5 enslaved persons would equal 3 free people. So they wouldn't allow the slave owners, you understand what I'm saying, to count all of their slaves, only 3/5 of the population. But again, the way many break it down is that it was every 5 enslaved people equaled 3 free people. That's the way they broke that down. So it wasn't saying the slaves were that a slave was 3/5 of a person. What it was saying is we're not gonna let you count all your slaves. We're gonna only let you count 3/5 of those other persons. Well, if you didn't know how many slaves you had, you understand what I'm saying? And you didn't know how to do a head count, and you didn't know how to divide 3/5 of that population, then what they would generally do was for every 5, they counted every 5 people, every 5 enslaved people as 3 free people. That's the way they broke it down, okay? But again, that's not saying anything about not being able to own slaves, okay? It actually talks about the owning of these other people, right? Then you have Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution. The migration or importation of such persons, right? As any of the states now existing shall think proper to admit. Now, only a free person could migrate, right? So who's being imported? That's like you're shipping goods. When you talk about import something, you understand what I'm saying? Yeah, people can migrate. You understand what I'm saying? People don't import themselves. If they're going to move to another place, they might migrate to another place, but they don't import themselves. Okay, but this says the migration or importation of such persons. So not only were they talking about the immigrants or those who were migrating to the United States, they were also talking about slaves. People who were being imported. Like products, like goods. That's what we think of when we think of importing and exporting. We think of importing and exporting goods and products, not people, okay? The migration or importation of such persons as any of the states now existing shall think proper to admit shall not be prohibited by Congress prior to the year 1808. That's 1808. But a tax or duty may be imposed on such importation. They didn't say migration that time. That time they left out the word migration and only said importation. Not exceeding $10 for each person. So what they were saying is they would not even think about prohibiting slavery. The importing of people. They would not even think about even looking at stopping it and prohibiting it by Congress until 1808. But if you decide to do it, if you decide to import such people, you understand that you might be taxed for that, and that tax won't exceed $10 per person. So you won't be taxed for the person that's migrating, because that person is coming here of his own free will. You don't have any ownership over that person. But that person that you are importing, that person is like a product. That person is like a good, and you own that, so you can be taxed for it. Talking about slavery. Then we go to Article 4, Section 2. This is the Constitution now. No person held to service or labor in one state under the laws thereof, escaping into another. Now it said escaping. So if you're escaping from something, then that means that you're pretty much being held prisoner. That means pretty much that you're being held against your will. You understand what I'm saying? This is not about indentured servitude. Because folks who were in indentured servitude went willingly and offered their service willingly so that their service could pay off their debt, because they knew that they couldn't afford to monetarily pay off their debt. So they went into indentured servitude willingly. So there was nothing for them to escape from, because if you escaped or if you left that servitude, then you still owe that debt. So you better be able to come up with that money. But if you are talking about escaping, then that means that that's somebody being held against their will. That's somebody being held like a slave. You understand what I'm saying? Like a prisoner or whatever, right? You gotta pick up on the words. No person held to service or labor in one state under the laws thereof, escaping into another state, shall, in consequence of any law or regulation therein, be discharged from such service or labor, but shall be delivered up on claim of the party to whom such service or labor may be due. So basically, if you're a slave and you escape to another state, you understand what I'm saying? And your slave master, your slave owner comes to get you, then you got to go. Because you owe them your service. You owe them your labor. Why? Because you are their property. They call this the Fugitive Slave Clause. They call this the Fugitive Slave Clause. They call it in some places they call it the Fugitive Slave Clause. In other people they just call it the Escaping Slave Clause or whatever. But it's clearly letting you know that it's not just talking about somebody that's in indentured servitude, because somebody that's in indentured servitude, you willingly give your service as payment for a debt. Because like I said, you know you can't afford monetarily to pay that debt. So you say, here, I'll work for you as a way of paying off that debt. I'll work for you for free as a way of paying off that debt. Same thing as if you walk in a restaurant, you know you ain't got the money to eat the food, you order the food, you eat it all, and then you volunteer to wash up all the dishes or clean up or do whatever, because you know you owe them that debt for that food that you ate. So you offer your service, you offer to work for free to pay that debt. But this talks about it escaping from one state into another state. They were talking about slaves. So these are the three articles and sections in the Constitution, in the original Constitution, that talk about slavery, and that actually uphold slavery, and that actually tell you that you can't even prohibit the importing of people. Just like you import goods and ship products, you can't even prohibit, Congress can't even prohibit the shipping in and importing of people until 1808. Okay? Now, down here is another quote from George Mason. The first one was from James Madison. Every word decides a question between power and liberty. This is from George Mason. Every master of slaves is born a petty tyrant. They bring the judgment of heaven upon a country. As nations cannot be rewarded or punished in the next world, they must be in this world. He says in this, and I'm just ad-libbing this world. By an inevitable chain of causes and effects, Providence punishes national sins by national calamities. And this is what he said August 22nd, 1787. And he was talking about slavery. He was talking about slavery. He was talking about slavery being the national sin. And he was talking about how heaven, how Providence was going to punish this nation for its national sin of slavery. Okay? So, here you have the Constitution upholding slavery. And telling people that you can't even talk about prohibiting it. Congress can't even talk about prohibiting it until 1808. And that if a slave escapes one state and goes to another state, that state, if his owner comes to claim him, that state has to return him to his owner, to his slave master, to his slave owner. Okay? Now this is the Constitution. The Founding Fathers. The document upon which this nation was founded. And it's saying that an enslaved person doesn't have a right to move freely. They don't have a right to go from one state to the next. They don't have a right to decide that they don't want to be a slave anymore or whatever. They are bound to their slave owner. And no matter where they go, if that slave owner comes to claim them, he has the right to claim them and take them and take that enslaved person back with them. That's white supremacy. Okay? And you got to remember, this is the document that these United States of America were founded on. Now, let's go a little deeper. So now you got the black folks enslaved. You got white supremacy up and running. Now you have established this white supremacy government. You have established this government that believes, this government that is established on the very belief that white Anglo-Saxon men, you understand what I'm saying, are superior to everybody else, especially black folks. And you have shown that you feel that superiority by the fact that you have terrorized them, you have enslaved them, you forcing them to work for you forcing them to make money for you forcing them to build your economy for you, the whole 9 yards. But that's not enough. Now you want to get into some slave codes. So let's talk about the slave codes. And I got this out of ushistory.org. SF, slave codes. Slaves did not accept their fate without protest. Many instances of rebellion were known to Americans, even in colonial times. These rebellions were not confined to the South. In fact, one of the earliest examples of a slave uprising was in 1712 in Manhattan. So people please understand that slavery was just not in the South. Everybody always wants to try to get the history screwed and try to act like this was just a Southern thing. No, there was slavery in the North. There were plantations in the North. Very few, but there were plantations in the North. You had a few people that were against slavery in the North, and they were called abolitionists. But yes, there was widespread slavery in the North. They're telling you here that one of the first uprisings, one of the earliest uprisings, slave uprisings, was in 1712 in Manhattan. I think they had one in 1811 in New York. As African Americans in the colonies grew greater and greater in number, there was a justifiable paranoia on the part of the white settlers that a violent rebellion could occur in one's own neighborhood. It was this fear of rebellion that led each colony to pass a series of laws restricting slaves' behaviors. The laws were known as slave codes. Although each colony had differing ideas about the rights of slaves, there were some common threads in slave codes across areas where slavery was common. Legally considered property, slaves were not allowed to own property of their own. They were not allowed to assemble without the presence of a white person. Slaves that lived off the plantation were subject to special curfews. They were not allowed to travel without passes. Remember in my last video with the Karens and all, we just got finished talking about these white folks, these Karens now, and these white folks now still asking us for identification and asking us to identify ourselves and identify where we coming from, where we going, why you here, why you there, and all of that, just like during slavery. When black folks could not travel without passes, without notes from their slave owners. In the courts, a slave accused of any crime against a white person was doomed. No testimony could be made by a slave against a white person. Therefore, the slave side of the story could never be told in a court of law. Of course, slaves were conspicuously absent from juries as well, of course. Slave codes had ruinous effects on African American society. It was illegal to teach slaves, a slave to read or write. Religious motives sometimes prevailed, however, as many devout white Christians educated slaves to enable the reading of the Bible. Well, they wanted them to read the Bible so that they could go around, you understand what I'm saying, and promote that that Jesus said, you got to be a good slave and you got to obey your slave master and this type of thing. That's the reason why they wanted them to learn how to read the Bible. And again, you got to remember, they had a special a slave Bible for the black folks that was different from the real King James Version that the white folks had. These same Christians did not recognize marriages between slaves in their laws. This made it easier to justify the breakup of families by selling one if its members selling one of its members to another owner. So they didn't recognize our marriages. They didn't recognize our culture. We weren't allowed to practice anything that came from our original cultures. None of that. As time passed, the numbers of African Americans in the New World increased. So did the fears of their white captors. With each new rebellion, the slave codes became even more strict, further abridging the already limited rights and privileges this oppressed people might hope to enjoy. So now, not only have you got me enslaved, not only are you forcing me to work for you, you understand what I'm saying? And I get no compensation whatsoever. You understand what I'm saying? Not only are you raping me, killing me, you understand, and brutalizing me, dehumanizing me in every possible way, but now you come up with these slave codes to restrict me even further. Why? Because you were afraid that I was going to rise up and do to you what you were doing to me. That I was going to rise up and terrorize you and murder you, you understand what I'm saying, and dehumanize you and mistreat you the same way you were doing me. So you had to come up with your slave codes. And all of this was law. And because the Constitution went along with it and said that you can't even start the process of prohibiting it until 1808, There was nobody to come to my aid. There was nobody to come to my defense. So then, after we finish with the slave codes, okay, well, then we move on to even more legislation. Even more laws that restricted black folks because of white supremacy. I'm white and I say so. I can do this to you because I'm white. And because I'm better than you. I'm superior and inherently superior to you. So I can do this to you. So then we move on to the black codes. Okay? This comes out of history.com. Black codes were restrictive laws designed to limit the freedom of African Americans and ensure, well, black folks, and ensure their availability as a cheap labor force after slavery was abolished during the Civil War. You understand what I'm saying? So now we didn't get rid of so-called, we didn't get rid of slavery. We didn't really get rid of it. All we did is designate, all we did is, the 13th Amendment didn't do anything but criminalize black folks. Because now I can still keep you enslaved, you understand what I'm saying, as long as I can get you convicted of a crime. So all the 13th Amendment really did was criminalize black folks. Because now all I need to do is criminalize you, you understand what I'm saying, and make everything that you do a crime, and I can put you right back into slavery. Though the Union victory had given some 4 million enslaved people their freedom, the question of freed black status in the post-war South was still very much unresolved. See, they're still trying to act like it was something that was just going on in the South. No, they also had black codes in the North. There was white supremacy and racism ran rampant in the North as well. So don't ever get it confused. Under black codes, many states required black people to sign yearly labor contracts. If they refused, they risked being arrested, fined, and forced into unpaid labor. Outrage over black codes helped undermine support for President Andrew Johnson and the Republican Party. I'm just going to read this a little bit because, like I said, all these articles will be listed down in the description box so you can go read them and go do some of your own research. When Reconstruction begins, when President Abraham Lincoln announced the impending passage of the Emancipation Proclamation in early 1863, the stakes of the Civil War shifted dramatically. A Union victory would mean no less than revolution in the South, where the peculiar institution of slavery, oh now it's peculiar, had dominated economic, political, and social life in the antebellum years. In April 1865, as the war drew to a close, Lincoln shocked many by proposing limited suffrage for African Americans in the South. He was assassinated days later, however, and his successor, Andrew Johnson, would be the one to preside over the beginning of Reconstruction. Now let's go on down here, and I'm just going to skip a little bit and read down. Passage of the Black Codes. Even as former enslaved people fought to assert their independence and gain economic autonomy during the earliest years of Reconstruction, white landowners acted to control the labor force through a system similar to the one that had existed during slavery. To that end, in late 1865, Missouri and South Carolina enacted the first Black Codes. Mississippi's law required black people to have written evidence of employment for the coming year each January. If they left before the end of the contract, they would be forced to forfeit earlier wages and were subject to arrest. In South Carolina, a law prohibited black people from holding any occupation other than farmer or servant unless they paid an annual tax of $10 to $100. This provision hit free black people already living in Charleston and former slave artisans especially hard. In both states, black people were given heavy penalties for vagrancy, including forced plantation labor in some cases. So now everything that you do, again, like I said, because of the 13th Amendment, now everything that you do is going to become a crime. Why? So that we can force you back into slavery. Because the 13th Amendment said you're free unless you're convicted of a crime. Now that's the black codes, and there's more in it, but this took root all over the place. This took root all over the place. Also, not only in the South, but in the North. These black codes, these laws that restricted what black folks could do, and these laws that were meant to criminalize you, you understand what I'm saying? So that the 13th Amendment could kick in and we can put you back in slavery. Right? Well, you move on from the black codes. See, we're showing where white supremacy is not an individual person or not a group of people. We're showing that the very government of the United States of America is white supremacy. Because these are laws that were enacted, and the federal government did nothing to stop it. So now we move up to Jim Crow. This is also out of history.com. Jim Crow laws were a collection of state and local statutes that legalized racial segregation. Named after a black minstrel show character. No, it was actually a white character in blackface, right? And then they started doing cartoons of him as a black dude. The laws, which existed for about 100 years from the post-Civil War era until 1968, were meant to marginalize black folks by denying them the right to vote, hold jobs, get an education, or other opportunities. Those who attempted to defy Jim Crow laws often faced arrest, fines, jail sentences, violence, and death. It was during this Jim Crow era that all of the lynchings really started picking up. Because now you got black folks, you understand what I'm saying? This is after the Civil War. Now you got black folks wanting to own their own land. And you got black folks wanting to start their own business. You got black folks wanting to be independent. You got black folks wanting to start their own towns and their own communities and their own cities and all of this kind of stuff. So this is when the lynchings really picked up in the United States. Because despite the slave codes, despite the black codes, despite the Jim Crow laws, you had black folks making advances. They wanted to start their own institutions of higher education. They wanted to go be doctors and be lawyers. And those who just continually defied these Jim Crow laws, you understand what I'm saying, were either arrested, fined, thrown in jail, or they experienced violence and death. Why? Because that's what white supremacy does. If I can't get you to submit, if I can't get you to be willing to subjugate yourself, then I'm going to force you to do it, and I will force you to do it by any means necessary. So if I have to terrorize you, if we have to commit violence against you, if we have to murder you, your family, whatever, that's what we're going to do. And you have to understand by now, the Ku Klux Klan, which is a product of white supremacy, it is not white supremacy. It is simply a product of white supremacy. By now, the Ku Klux Klan is already on the scene. Along with some of these other white supremacist militias, you know, from state to state to state. Terrorizing black folks. Even terrorizing and killing white folks that stood up for what was right. Now, even in here, it goes to talking about the black codes. talks about the Ku Klux Klan, and then it talks about Jim Crow laws expand. At the start of the 1800s, big cities in the South were not wholly beholden to Jim Crow laws, and black Americans found more freedom in them. This led to substantial black populations moving to the cities, and as the decade progressed, white city dwellers demanded more laws to limit opportunities for African Americans, for black folks. Jim Crow laws soon spread around the country with even more force than previously. Public parks were forbidden for black people to enter. Theaters, restaurants were segregated. Segregated waiting rooms and bus and train stations were required, as well as water fountains, restrooms, building entrances, elevators, cemeteries, even amusement park cashier windows. Laws forbade black people from living in white neighborhoods. Segregation was enforced for public school, public pools, phone booths, hospitals, asylums, jails, and residential homes for the elderly and handicapped. Some states required separate textbooks for black and white students. Hold on a minute, y'all. Let me see who this is. Hold on. Probably ain't nobody, but hold on. Hello? Mm-hmm. It says, okay, that was not very important. It says some states required separate textbooks for black and white students. I just read that. New Orleans mandated the segregation of prostitutes according to race. Now, even prostitutes couldn't hang out together. In Atlanta, black folks in court were given a different Bible from white people to swear on. Marriage and cohabitation between white and black people was strictly forbidden in most southern states. It was not uncommon to see signs posted at town and city limits warning African Americans, black folks, that they were not welcome there. We're talking about those sundown towns where they would plainly put the sign up and let it be known that your black tail better not be caught in this town after sundown. Okay? So now these were Jim Crow laws. And this existed up until the 1960s. From the end of Reconstruction to the 1960s. Okay? And let me bring to y'all attention something that some of you may know about, some of you don't know, not know about. But they did a movie on this. So I just want to throw it in here and talk about it a little bit. I got this also from history.com, and this will be linked in the description box as well. The Green Book, the Black Traveler's Guide to Jim Crow America. For nearly 30 years, a guide called the Negro Motorist Green Book provided black folks with advice on safe places to eat and sleep when they traveled through the Jim Crow era United States. It says there will be a day sometime in the near future when this guide will not have to be published. That is when we as a race will have equal opportunities and privileges in the United States. It will be a great day for us to suspend this publication, for then we can go wherever we please and without embarrassment. That was how the authors of the Negro Motorist Green Book ended the introduction to their 1948 edition. In the pages that followed, they provided a rundown of hotels, guest houses, service stations, drugstores, taverns, barbershops, and restaurants that were known to be safe ports of call for black travelers. The Green Book listed establishments in segregationist strongholds such as Alabama and Mississippi, but its reach also extended from Connecticut to California. So understand, this thing was nationwide. They need to stop trying to act like it was just a southern thing. It was nationwide. Any place where its readers might face prejudice or danger because of their skin color. With Jim Crow still looming over much of the country, a motto on the guide's cover also doubled as a warning. Carry your green book with you. You may need it. Now, it was first published in 1936 by this Harlem-based postal carrier named Victor Hugo Green. And he understood. He understood about the sundown towns. He understood about the white-only policies. He understood about all of that. And he produced this green book, you understand what I'm saying, as a travel guide for black Americans, for foundational black Americans, as they tried to navigate these roads and these highways during this Jim Crow era. Because black people were being stopped, black people were being murdered, they were being lynched, they were being thrown in jail, the whole 9 yards. So they actually had to have a guide and carry this book with them to try to keep them safe when they traveled. So I just wanted to throw that in there. Now, after Jim Crow, or right around the time of Jim Crow, just as Jim Crow was kind of fizzling with the Jim Crow laws, the Jim Crow segregation laws were kind of starting to fizzle down and sizzle down a little bit. Then Congress decided that it wanted to enact this Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956. Now you have to understand, this is all stuff coming from the federal government, from state and local government. You understand what I'm saying? All of these laws, all of these acts, all of this stuff. Why? Because this white supremacist government was founded here in the United States. The government itself was founded on white supremacy. And the different laws and the different legislation that it acted, that it enacted, whether it be local, state, or federal, supported white supremacy. Now, we done already talked about all the, well, we ain't talked about all of them, but we've already talked about several of the black towns and the black cities and all of that kind of stuff that white supremacy came in and destroyed, and white supremacy came in and burned everything down. What they didn't burn down, they tried to steal, killing folk and all of that. But black folks were still trying to strive. Black folks were still trying to build. So all the intimidation, all the terrorism coming from the Klan and coming from the law enforcement that was in cahoots with the Klan and all of that, none of that was stopping us from building. None of that was stopping us from having our own communities, owning our own businesses, thriving. So they had to come up with something that would really, really stop it. Once and for all, something that would really, really nip it in the bud. And that is what this Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956, that's what it did. I'll have it linked in the description box. And you can read it yourself, but I'm just going to read a snippet of it. The neighborhoods destroyed and families uprooted by highway projects were largely black and poor, wrote New York University law professor Deborah N. Archer in her article, White Men's Roads Through Black Men's Homes, Advancing Racial Equity Through Highway Reconstruction. And that was by design, she noted. Policymakers and planners saw highway construction as a convenient way to razz neighborhoods considered undesirable or blighted. Because by then you done had your white flight, you understand what I'm saying? You done had your white folks running to the suburbs to try to get away from, so-called get away from black folks and all of this. Plus there was already this desegregation going on, segregation going on in the South, so they were already separate, right? And they deployed the massive infrastructure elements multi-lane road beds, concrete walls, ramps, and overpasses as tools of segregation, physical buffers to isolate communities of color. Well, you know, I don't go along with that communities of color, black communities. Hardly a major city with a significant minority population went unscathed by the legislation. New York, Miami, Chicago, Minneapolis, Pittsburgh, Oakland, Nashville, Baltimore, Atlanta, and more. By the time the interstate highway system was completed, Archer wrote, it had fundamentally restructured urban America. And the guy they credit with being the urban planner for New York and getting all of this stuff done was this dude named Robert Moses. And his thing was, our categorical imperative is action to clear the slums, Moses said in a 1959 speech. We can't let minorities dictate that this century-old chore will be put off another generation or finally abandoned. At a committee meeting, this is what he said: go right through cities and not around them. Two of the city's main arteries he created, the Cross Bronx and Brooklyn Queens expressways, did just that, cutting through the heart of the Bronx and Red Hook neighborhoods. Black neighborhoods were decimated. In the first half of the 20th century, Miami's culturally vibrant black community of Overton was widely considered the Harlem of the South and Little Broadway. But after the passage of the 1956 highway bill, the expansion of I-95 through Miami led to the destruction of 87 acres of housing and commercial property in the community. According to Richard Rothstein's The Color of Law, a forgotten history of how our government segregated America, only 8,000 of an estimated population of 40,000 remained in Overton after the highway expansion. Blocked from moving into white neighborhoods, displaced residents were forced to crowd into nearby sections of the city already struggling with poverty and urban decay. And then they have the nerve, these white supremacists and these white folks in the dominant society have the nerve to talk about the ghettos and all of this kind of stuff that black folks live in when it was the government. Through all of these various laws, slave codes, black codes, Jim Crow, this highway act, and all that, they were the ones that created the ghettos. So are you starting to understand how white supremacy, just the mere existence of white supremacy, demands that we receive our reparations? Because all of this stuff targeted us, didn't target any other group of people. That's why the Asians still have all of their Chinatowns and they little Taiwans and all of that. That's the reason why the Mexicans still got and the Dominicans and all those folks still got all their little enclaves and all of that kind of stuff, because they weren't targeted like we were. But you don't see any thriving black communities anymore. Why? Because they did this to make sure that they destroyed them, that they destroyed the cohesiveness, that they destroyed the togetherness, that they destroyed that sense of community. So let's go just a little bit further, because I'm almost done. I just want to go a little bit further. Just want to do one or two more. Now, you know they say that Lyndon Baines Johnson quoted that with the signing of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, that he would have black folks voting for the Democrats for the next 100, 200 years, right? And many believe that that's the only reason why he pushed the legislation, that's the only reason why he went along with the legislation, that's the only reason why he signed it. It's because he saw it as a way to bolster the Democratic Party, you understand what I'm saying? And to keep the Democratic Party in power through that large black vote that they would get. And he wasn't lying. After all these years, after some 60 plus years, and the Democratic Party still ain't done nothing for black folks, you still got black folks in large numbers running around talking about voting for him. So he knew what so evidently his strategy was correct. He certainly didn't do it because he liked black people. You understand what I'm saying? Because it's well known that his use of the word nigger was just out there. He used that word like it wasn't nothing. And then he also knew that there was certain language that had been used in the Civil Rights Act that would allow other people to eventually come in and gut it and get all the benefits that were meant for us. Minorities. Sex. Words that were never in the original bill. Words that were never supposed to be there. All right, but then let's go on past Johnson and let's get down here to Nixon. And I got this from the Equal Justice Initiative. And it talks about Nixon advisor admits war on drugs was designed to criminalize black people. Okay? For those of you who didn't know, because this is a little history lesson for those of you who listen to me and you didn't know some of this stuff. You understand what I'm saying? You're young and you didn't know some of this stuff, and maybe your parents didn't tell you or whatever. Now you can go research it and you can find out your history, and you'll find out that what you're seeing today is nothing new. And you will understand that you are dealing with a white supremacist government. You are dealing with a white supremacist society. A society that was founded on white supremacy and is still run by white supremacy. Now I'm just going to read a little bit of this. And I'm actually going to read his quote. In a new article for Harper's Magazine, journalist Dan Baum reports that President Richard Nixon's domestic policy chief, John Ehrlichman, admitted that the war on drugs was designed to have precisely this impact on the black community. In a 1994 interview, Mr. Ehrlichman said, "You want to know what this was really all about?" He went on. The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies: the anti-war left and black people. And he didn't say people of color. He didn't say minorities. He didn't say poor people. He didn't say marginalized groups. He didn't say marginalized people. He didn't say LGBT people. He said black people, point blank, period. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either. Meaning we couldn't make it illegal for you to be against the war or for you to be black. But by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. Those against the war and the black community. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. So he's clearly letting you know that mainstream media was a part of this plot to criminalize and vilify black folks. To make you think that it's all about drugs and that all we do is drugs and we just so hyped up on drugs, and because we so hyped up on drugs, we ain't nothing but a bunch of criminals that's going around robbing and stealing and killing and raping and doing all of that. when it was just a lie. It was propaganda. Now just listen. These are his next words. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. Now this man has admitted this. He admitted this in 1994. You understand what I'm saying? No action was taken against him. He wasn't charged with nothing. He wasn't arrested. He wasn't put on trial. No nothing. And he admits that the government just lied on a whole race of people to disrupt their community. But he never explains why blacks were the enemy of the Nixon White House. But that's what he said. The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies. But he never explains why black folks were the enemy. We are always public enemy number one. Now get this. President Nixon's creation of a war on drugs to criminalize black people amplified the presumption of guilt assigned to black people since slavery, and entrenched the racialization of criminality that began in earnest with lynching. The Nixon administration's strategy of using drugs to vilify black folks night after night on the evening news fostered a politics of fear and anger that reached frenzied heights in the 1990s. Sensationalist media accounts of soaring crime rates, ain't that what we're hearing now? Ain't that the same thing we're hearing now with all of this so-called snatch and grab and all of this stuff that's supposed to be going on, all of this high crime that's supposed to be going on in Atlanta and in California and in Chicago and all of this? It's nothing but a bunch of propaganda. It's nothing but a bunch of fear-mongering, just like it was during this time. Sensationalist media accounts of soaring crime rates in the 1980s and early 1990s, combined with extraordinary resentment about rehabilitation programs within prisons, to create a political environment in which every elected official sought to be tough on crime. And see, that's what they're trying to do now. They're trying to criminalize us again. That's the reason why they got all of these lies and all of this propaganda about us committing these crimes against these Asians. All of these staged attacks. Trying to whip these folks up in a frenzy. That is some kind of crime wave going on. You better watch out. The niggas gonna come and get you. Why? So they can give more money to the police, so they can stop people from talking about defunding the police, the whole 9 yards. And so they'll be justified when they start back up, just randomly killing black folks in the street, unarmed black folks in the street. Decrying that gangs and drugs have taken over our streets and undermined our schools, President Bill Clinton in 1994 signed the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act, allotting $12.5 billion to states to increase incarceration. That's that Jim Crow Joe Act. That's that Biden's law. The 1994 crime bill. But all of that got started with Nixon. And it was never meant to be a war on drugs. It was always meant to be a war on black folks. To criminalize black folks. And wasn't nobody trying to be tough on tough on crime or nothing like that. They were doing exactly what they intended to do, and that was target us and get us mass incarcerated. Why? Because the 13th Amendment said you got to criminalize them niggas so you can put them back in slavery. And they have been criminalizing us ever since. Every little thing we do is a crime. Every little thing we do is a felony. But you have to understand, this is the government this white supremacist government enacting all of these laws, passing all of this legislation, all of these bills and stuff. So what's the difference between this and the black codes? What's the difference between redlining and the slave codes? What's the difference between redlining and Jim Crow? What's the difference between these crime bills and the black codes? None whatsoever. Now, let's go to one more. I had one more. And in the description box, I'm also going to have some information for y'all about the 1898 Wilmington Massacre. How white supremacy overthrew the whole entire government. Because in 1989, Wilmington was booming. They had a very successful black population. There were black business owners. There were black people holding local office and holding state law office. There were several of them that had actually been sent to Washington. And the white supremacists couldn't take it, so they plotted and they planned and they took over the entire government. So I'll have links to a video that you can watch and other stuff that you can read. White supremacy. All of this is proof that the mere existence of white supremacy demands that we get our reparations. So when these white folks come to you and these different folks come to you and these different groups of people and even black folks come to you talking about wise reparations for slavery that happened so long ago, why should I be held responsible for what my ancestors did and all of that kind of stuff, let them know. This has been an ongoing thing. This ain't something that stopped at slavery. This ain't something that stopped at 1863 or 1865. We got black folks now talking about how they go to have their home appraised, and if they go as black people, how their homes are not appraised right, but if they seeing white folks to do it for them, you understand what I'm saying? The appraisal comes back 3, 4, 5 more times more than it was when that black person went to have their home appraised. We see how black businesses are sabotaged. Look at the turkey leg hut. Look at the guy that was doing the little popcorn thing. You understand what I'm saying? How they come up with all of these different code violations and regulations and all this kind of stuff that you violated so that they can come and harass you and try to find ways to shut down your black business. This country was founded on white supremacy, racism. The government we created was a government of white supremacy. And it is still a government of white supremacy. And it still targets black people to this day. 1994 wasn't that long ago. That crime bill, just like that Asian hate crimes bill that was just passed in 2021 that didn't come about until all of a sudden you start seeing all these lies and all of this propaganda and all these staged attacks about black folks attacking Asians. So again, the mere existence of white supremacy. And make sure that you let these folks know we didn't name it white supremacy. They named it white supremacy. You will see actual pictures of articles in this video where they call it white supremacy. They named it that, we didn't. It's their ideology, not ours. Although we got some coons and some bootlegs that subscribe to it, but it's mere existence. And the fact that it still exists, that it's still creating laws to target us, that there's proof through the FBI and all kind of investigations and all kind of information that's coming out that white supremacy and law enforcement are still working hand in hand like they always have. The mere fact that white supremacy still exists after almost 500 years is all the evidence we need, is all the validation that we need for our justice claim for reparations against the United States of America. And that's what I wanted to bring to y'all today. I wanted to bring y'all that information and make it clear. We got to get back to the heart of this thing, white supremacy. We got to get back to the reason for our demand for reparations, white supremacy, and all the harm and all the damage that white supremacy has caused us. From slavery, the enslavement of our people, until now, 2021. And the debt is still building. They still gathering money on the debt. So when people come to you talking about reparations, this is the kind of information that you need to be able to give them. These are the kind of arguments that you need to have to be able to counter them when they come to you with this bullshit about why do y'all supposed to get reparations and why are we supposed to be held responsible. You're supposed to be held responsible because you benefit from white supremacy. As a member of the dominant society, you benefit from white supremacy. I also have in this description box an article that links directly some of the biggest banks and some of the biggest investment firms, Wall Street, some of the biggest insurance companies, all of them are linked to slavery and all the money that they made off of the slave trade. So y'all make sure y'all get down in that description box. You understand what I'm saying? Read these articles, watch these videos, know what went on in your history, watch that information and read that information about Wilmington 1898. You know, do some of your own research. Share this video, have these conversations, spread this information, because the more we know, the better. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, hit that bell notification, support the channel through PayPal or Cash App if you so choose. But make sure you share this information. Make sure you get this information. Make sure you learn this information. And make sure we get back to, we can't allow them to distract us and deflect from the real issue. The real issue is reparations and tangibles for foundational Black Americans. Bottom line. We are on that square. We got to stay on that square. And we have got to understand that the mere existence of white supremacy validates our demand for reparations. Y'all have a good day.